Welcome and thank you for watching the NWEA Student Profile Report PD On Demand video. In this video, we will learn to better understand and interpret data shown in the Student Profile Report. The Student Profile Report can be accessed as a separate standalone report by visiting NWEA Map Growth Reports. It can also be selected from student names in the class profile report. As we begin to look at the student profile report, it is important to understand a few data points. The first is, what is a RIT scale? RIT scale, or RIT points, stands for Roche unit, and it is a measurement tool used by many assessment companies, including NWEA, to measure achievement and growth over time. There are several RIT scales in NWEA, one each for reading, language usage, mathematics, and general science. The characteristics of the RIT scale and RIT scores are that the scales are stable, equal interval scales that use item difficulty values to measure student achievement, and this achievement is independent of grade level. Therefore, the RIT scores and the RIT scales transcend across all grade levels. The difference in scores is the same regardless of whether a student is at the top, bottom, or middle of the RIT scale. The RIT scale is stable in that the scores on the same scale from different students or from the same student at different testing times can be directly compared, even though different sets of test items are administered. The reason different types of test items are administered is because the map growth assessments are adaptive. That means that students in the fall will start at the RIT scale that is normal for the time of year and grade level. The adaptive portion comes into play in that students can see testing items above or below their grade level depending on the level to which they answer test items correctly. For example, at the time of this recording, students may see test items 2 grade levels above or 2 grade levels below their current grade, again, depending on how they answer the test assessment items. The RIT score has the same meaning regardless of the grade or age of the student. We often look at achievement and growth. Achievement is how a student performs in a tested subject relative to grade level peers based on the NWEA norming study data. Growth is how a student progresses in the tested subject relative to all students who have taken the assessment. So achievement looks at students just in that specific grade level. Growth looks at students across all grade levels in reference to the RIT scale. It's important to note a few things about student growth. On the student report, you will often see growth referred to as conditional growth. This means that growth is measured and determined by certain conditions that the student does or does not meet based on how they progress on the assessment. The conditions in which growth is measured is it looks for student data, again that norming data, based on the same grade level, the same weeks of instruction, and the same starting RIT. It's important to understand that the growth measurement or the growth goal incorporates how difficult it was for each student to grow. For example, students who start with a higher RIT score will have a harder time showing growth than a student with a lower score. By the same notion, students in higher grade levels will also have a harder time showing growth than students in lower grade levels. You will also see percentile bands. Students are grouped based on their achievement RIT score into a series of color-coded RIT bands. As you can see at the bottom of your screen, high achievement is designated by a blue color, and that is anything at or above the 80th percentile. High average is designated by green, and that is anything in the 61st through the 80th percentile. Average is yellow, and that's the 41st through the 60th percentile. Low average is a peach or orange color, and that is the 21st through the 40th percentile. And low is red, and that's anything at or below the 21st percentile. When you initially access the Student Profile Report, you will see a series of 4 tabs at the top of the screen. This will show you basic information for the mathematics, reading, language usage, and science assessments. As you can see in the top right, there could be times where the tabs are blank or you have a series of dots. This means that that grade level did not take the assessment, for example, science, or perhaps that the student was absent and did not take a particular assessment. The Student Profile Report will always default to the most current testing term, although right above where you see the student name, there is a drop-down box and you can select previous assessment terms as well. The tabs will also correspond to those percentile color bands that were mentioned in the previous slide. As you can see here, we have a fictitious student, Sarah Baker. Her mathematics tab is the first tab that opens. And she has an overall RIT score on this assessment of a 171, which puts her into the red percentile grouping. You can see some information for this assessment, such as standard error. You will see that it says plus or minus 4.4. Standard error indicates that if the student took this same test over again in the same testing window, they would be predicted to increase or decrease their RIT score by the amount of points shown under standard error. That standard error is correlated to that possible RIT range. The student could go up or down. If she retook the test, she could potentially have a RIT score of between a 167 and a 175. Below that, it will show the date in which the student took the assessment and also how many minutes the student spent on the assessment. The average at the time of this recording is 45 minutes for each of the assessment areas. Rapid guessing percent. There's an algorithm within the testing framework that will look at if students are clicking through the test too rapidly, are selecting answers and clicking next at a more rapid than normal rate. And if this is the case, it will be indicated by the percent of times the student rapid guessed on the assessment. You can look at the rapid guessing percent and also the number of minutes spent on the assessment, along with the historical overtime data of the student to determine if a retest might be necessary. You will also see underneath rapid guessing the estimated impact of rapid guessing. This will be the percent of test items that are incorrect as a result of moving too rapidly through the assessment. Then underneath that, you will see the name of the assessment that is taken. Please make sure that each time you complete a benchmark assessment, that would be fall, winter, or spring, that your students take the growth version of the assessment. There are other versions of the assessment, such as screening, but those will not produce a RIT score or data that can be used for classroom instructional decisions. If we look underneath the tabs, you will get some basic insights on your student. In this case, you can see that there is a recommendation to help Sarah boost her performance in math and to better match her peers. Reviewing her scores in the instructional areas to find skills and concepts she is ready to learn might be an option. As you can see, there are some comparison data. We have instructional areas, which at the top it's mentioning you should look at. And there is an area to set growth goals. We will look at this in further slides. I want to point out that even though you may be in a report for a single student, there are two ways to navigate through the students that are rostered to your classroom. One way would be by clicking on the arrows on the left and right sides of the screen. Those will cycle through the students on your roster. Or you can click where you see the 2 students and the 3 lines, the hamburger. If you click on that button, you will be able to see a drop-down list of each student in your roster. If we were to continue scrolling down on this report, this is where you would see a graph with the historic data over time of how the student has progressed in the specific content area of the tab selected up at the top of the report. As you can see from this graph, the student in question began taking MAP growth assessments in the fall of 2023 as she started 7th grade. So for grade 7, she has a 206 RIT score. Winter of 24, she went up to a 209, and she stayed stagnant at a 209 for the spring of 24 as well. You will see at the bottom that it gives you those percentile bands. So again, those are the color-coded bands that we talked about at the beginning of this presentation. These bands correspond with the colors on the graph. And you will see that the dotted line in the middle of the yellow, that is the 50th percentile for achievement. And that is considered normal achievement for students at any particular grade level. You'll also see on the right side of the screen that it will give some linking data for various assessments. This can be turned on and off based on the desired data to be viewed. If we go back up and look at the top of the report, you will see 2 arrows under each of these data modules. So under comparisons, under instructional areas, and under growth goals. This indicates that those arrows can be clicked on, and those data points will expand to show more information than is being presented in the initial view. So I'm going to click on the 2 arrows next to comparisons. It's going to open up a window that looks something like this. It will give the growth and achievement percentiles for the student. Again, this will be based on the assessment that is selected in the tabs at the top of the screen. It's also important to keep in mind that these reports will default to the most recent testing window. So for this sample student, we are looking at a comparison from fall 23 to spring 24. This would indicate to me that this report is after the final round of spring testing. It will give you some information, so it will tell you what the student is in for growth and achievement. Again, these are looking at the norming data provided by NWEA based on all students at the same grade level with the same weeks of instruction who have taken this test at the same time as your students. So this student is at the 39th percentile for growth and the 28th percentile for achievement. This student is below the mean or the average in both instances. It will show you where the student will rank on the quadrant report. So low achievement, low growth. We'd love everybody to be in the green, high achievement, high growth. But again, normal growth and achievement for students at any grade level is the 50th percentile. We talked a little about conditional growth. You will see here that this student has a negative conditional growth index. This means that the student did not meet their growth projection. If you see here, the student was projected to grow 5 RIT points. This would have been from winter to spring, based on the report we're looking at. Their observed growth was only 3 RIT points, so they missed their projected growth by 2 RIT points. That's why you will see a negative number. So for conditional growth, if you see a 0 under conditional growth, that indicates that the student is at the 50th percentile and has exactly met their growth goal. If you see a number that is above 0, that means that the student grew above their growth projection. And in this case, if you see a negative number or below a 0, that indicates the student did not meet their growth projection. If we go over to the right, you will also see some projections for various assessments. So for this student, if they took the PSSA, they would score at a basic level. And at this time, this student is not on track for the ACT College Readiness Assessment or the SAT if they took it in the spring of 24. Again, this is based on the data for the report you are looking at. So it's dependent on if you're looking at fall data, winter data, or spring data. You'll also see mapping the road to college. There is a College Explorer tool that we will look at in another video, but I do have the link down there if you wanted to go to that website and take a look at what it has to offer. It does a great job of taking students' individual data, showing them what they'd be on track to go to school for and what colleges or trade schools would offer the programs they're interested in. And then it goes into tuition and the ACT and SAT scores they'd have to receive to get into that specific college, university, or trade school. You will also see a Lexile level. So in this case, we're looking at a reading assessment. So it will give you a Lexile range for the student. If it's math, it would show a quintile range, which basically means think of a Lexile level in terms of mathematical computation ability. So again, the student growth projection is norm reference. It's designed to compare and rank test takers in relation to one another. This norming data is updated every 5 years, and so it will be updated this summer of 2025. Student growth projection is dependent on their grade level, the RIT score in the subject they're being tested, and it indicates an average for all students in the same grade, subject, and starting RIT. So again, their growth projection is dependent on their RIT score and how well they did on the assessment. For example, if a student's growth projection from fall to spring is to increase 5 RIT points, this means that all students in the same grade and subject and starting RIT score had an average growth that was 5 RIT points. Next, we're going to look at instructional areas. So in this case, we're looking at math. And this is where the assessment breaks down the RIT scores, not only to give you an overall RIT score, but then a separate RIT score for instructional areas that are tested on the assessment. So in this case, we're looking at measurements and data, geometry, operation and algebraic thinking, and number and operations. It may be hard to see, but you can tell that it's going to give you areas that are a strength for students. And if there's an area where they're really struggling, it's going to say an area for improvement. So again, I'm going to click on these two little arrows and we're going to expand this data point and take a look. So you will see, if you look at the left-hand side, this particular student in reading, so I'm trying to show you various content areas to get you familiar with it. So this is an instructional areas of focus for reading. You can see we're looking at reading literature, reading informational text, and vocabulary acquisition and use. You will see that the lowest RIT score for this student is a 202, and it's indicating that that is the suggested area of focus. Subsequently, reading informational text was a 208. They could use some support there as well. And their highest RIT score was a 215 for vocabulary acquisition and usage. Again, you will see the plus and minus numerical data points under each of these RIT scores. Again, that is the standard error, standard deviation. That means that if the student, again, took the same test at the same time, they would possibly get that many RIT points higher or lower in a RIT score. I want to point out here at the top, you can look at this data by standard or by strand, by topic. It will default to where your student is based on their RIT score, but you can go in and look at specific grade levels. You can show and hide learning statements. And you can select what learning statements you'd like to view. So you can look at areas that the student needs to reinforce. You could look at the areas the student needs to develop in, or you can look at items that are able to be introduced but really need support because they're not quite there yet based on their RIT score. You can check mark these, toggle these on and off. You could show all of them, you could show one of them, whatever works for you. And it will give you specific standards and topics based on your student's RIT score. So for example, the student needs to reinforce determining critical ideas in literary text, determining details that support central idea, determining the effect of a situation or event in literary text, and so on. So this is really helpful information for you to pinpoint what areas the student is struggling with and needs additional support so that they can increase their RIT score and meet or exceed their growth goal. Please keep in mind that if a student meets their growth goal, so you see that 0 in conditional growth, they've met their goal perfectly, it does not mean that their achievement will increase. To increase student achievement, the student needs to exceed their specific growth goal for that period in time. So next we're going to look at growth goals. So again, there is a double arrow. There is a feature in each student profile report to set a goal. Please keep in mind that if you enter a goal, again, it only corresponds to the tab. If I go back here, it will correspond to whatever assessment tab you have open. So you could only put a goal for math in the math tab. If you want to enter a goal for reading, it would need to be under the reading tab, and so on. So if you click on those double arrows next to growth goal, you will see this screen. It will show you that data over time chart. and it will default to information on where the student is projected to go next. So if we're looking at spring data, there was a 209 in the spring. The student, we're setting a goal for fall, potentially in this example. The student is projected to increase 1 RIT point and be at a 210 in the fall of 24. If they stay on track, by the end of the school year, spring of 25, they're projected to be at a 214. So the system will automatically put in the goal for the next upcoming assessment window. So in this case, a goal RIT score of a 210, which is a growth of 1 RIT point. So again, from the 209 in the spring to a 210 in the fall is 1 point. And it will give you what their achievement percentile would be if they meet this RIT score. In this case, they'd be at the 32nd percentile. You can put information in for an action plan on what the student's going to work on or what the teacher's going to work on with the student to get to that goal. And then you can select Set Goal. Keep in mind that all of these numerical boxes are editable. You can change them. But keep in mind, if you go too high, the student probably won't achieve that goal. And the system will actually come up and warn you if you go too far above what the system thinks the goal should be based on the norming data and where your student is at that particular time. The nice thing about goal setting is this will follow the student, and you can print data and look at results on which students are meeting their goals and which students still have some work to do. And again, it will give you those areas of focus. So reading literature for this student is a suggested area of focus because they only got a 202 RIT score, along with reading informational text would be something to really work on. It's also important to keep in mind that achievement and growth are related. So we have an example of a 4th grade student named Sophia. So let's put conceptual examples into a more concrete example. So Sophia's in 4th grade, and she took the Math 2 to 5 growth assessment in the 4th week of instruction and scored a 194 overall RIT score. That RIT score put her in the 35th percentile for math achievement. And that means that Sophia scored better than 35% of her 4th grade peers across the nation. She's projected to grow 11 RIT points from fall to spring, based on how other students grew in that norming group. If Sophia meets the growth projection by those 11 points, she will observe growth at the 50th percentile. And this means that she will maintain her achievement, finishing the year at the 35th percentile for math achievement. Essentially, it means that she would be growing better than 50% of her peers and achieving better than 30% of that group. However, as I stated, achievement and growth are related. So Sophia is expected to grow 11 RIT points. If Sophia only grows 8 RIT points, she will not meet the growth projection and will be observed as having growth at the 30th percentile. Notice that growth less than her projection results in a decrease in math achievement. So meeting her RIT goal of 11 points puts her at the 50th percentile for growth, 35th percentile for achievement. If she misses it by only 3 RIT points, It drops her down to the 31st percentile for growth, 30th percentile for achievement. Essentially, she will have to observe growth across the year. She continued to grow, but not at the rate of peers at the same time, at the same grade level. So the less students achieve their goal, the more of a gap in achievement will be in place for that student. On the other hand, if the student increases their RIT score more than is projected, so instead of 11 RIT points from fall to spring, Sophia grew by 14 RIT points, so 3 points higher than the projection, that would bump her up to the 65th percentile for growth and the 44th percentile for achievement. And that means that she's showing growth at a rate higher than the average of other students in that norming group. And she will experience an acceleration in moving up in achievement. I hope this video helps you understand the student profile report. Thanks for watching.